and welcome to Conscious Caregiving with L&L. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at Conscious Caregiving with L&L something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome an esteemed panel of guests to discuss the issue of unmasking elder abuse with my co-host, Lori LeBay. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Conscious Caregiving with L&L. Thank you all so much for being with us today in the esteemed panel. I would like to start by asking you all to do a short introduction of your background, credentials, experiences, and anything else you'd like to share with our audiences. Paul Greenwood, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Lance. My name is Paul Greenwood. I am a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for over 43 years, initially in the UK, where I was first a trainee barrister, then a solicitor. And then for 25 years, I was a career prosecutor with the San Diego District Attorney's Office. What brings me to the table today is the fact that I was fortunate enough for 22 of those 25 years to prosecute crimes committed against older adults that California defines as anybody over the age of 65, ranging from physical assaults, homicides, sexual assaults, rapes, to neglect and elder financial exploitation. Since I retired from that office, I've been very involved with AARP nationally to try to extend and share the information that I've learned in the courtroom over 25 years with a wider audience.
Wonderful. And thank you again for being with us today, Paul. Susan.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me and letting me join this panel. I've been a registered nurse for 35 years, and I've been in forensic nurse since 2000. I've worked with local, state, federal, and military police in those since 2000. And I've done over 500 forensic cases in elder abuse, sexual assault, trauma, which would be gunshot wound stabbings, anything that would be considered a crime.
Okay. Well, thank you for being with us today, Susan. And I wanted to mention to you, Susan Carlson is your full name, and we appreciate you being with us today. I know Chris Sundberg will be joining the panel shortly, and we'll have her do her introduction once she joins us. Next, we have Mr. Elon Caspi.
Hi, my name is Caspi. I'm a gerontologist. I started in the aging field nearly 30 years ago as a nurse aide in a nursing home where my grandfather lived. I worked as a social worker in nursing homes, consultant, applied researcher, and over the past 15 years, I conducted multiple studies on various aiming to improve understanding and the prevention of various forms of mistreatment against older adults.
Well, thank you for being with us, Elon, all the way from Israel today, I understand, too.
Yes.
Next is a good friend, Bettina Morrow.
Good morning, Lance and Laurie. Thank you for having me on today's session. My name is Bettina Morrow. I have a 20-plus year career that started in Australia and proceeded to move to England, where I practiced professionally for about 9 years. And for the last 10 years, I have been living in the United States. For the past 16 years, I've specialized in elder abuse with a particular interest in dementia, having completed a master's in dementia through the University of Tasmania. I also do a lot of specialization in guardianship. So very particularly interested in the intersections between dementia and elder abuse and how they actually correlate with one another. And I'm very pleased to be here today with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Mr. Rick Montcastle.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on this distinguished panel. So I'm a retired federal and state prosecutor and the former United States Attorney for the Western District of Virginia. And I spent over 2 decades leading criminal and civil prosecutions of companies and individuals who unlawfully exploit the most vulnerable, including nursing home residents. I was the lead prosecutor against OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma, as depicted in the Emmy-nominated miniseries Dopesick, and I led the prosecution of Abbott Laboratories for unlawfully marketing the epilepsy drug Depakote as a chemical restraint for agitation in nursing home residents with dementia. I'm currently a producer for the documentary No Country for Old People. It's a film by award-winning filmmaker Susie Singer Carter. And this film, which is currently being edited, educates the public about the systemic abuse and neglect in nursing home residents as a result of a system in which patient care decisions are frequently based on financial considerations. And I believe that educating and energizing the public through film and other media like podcasts such as this is the best hope to change a system that has normalized abuse and neglect.
Well, we appreciate all the work you've done, Rick, and I believe you're going to share a trailer of the video with us later in the episode so viewers can get a better understanding of how powerful the movie actually is. And now, Mr. Bill Lightfoot.
Good morning. I am a retired Richmond City police sergeant, and I spent 36 years with Richmond Police. And my last assignment was as an elder abuse domestic violence investigator. I still do, after I retired, I didn't want to give up the work, so I just started a consulting and training career on my own. And what I do now is train law enforcement, social services, professionals in elder abuse and how to respond to elder abuse.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you for your service and for being with us today on the panel. Next, we have Chris Sundberg. Chris, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Lance. I'm Chris Sundberg, actually Christine, if we want to be more formal. I'm Executive Director of Elder Voice Advocates and Elder Care IQ. And I came into this realm because of what happened to my father in a long-term care facility. And when that happened, I was driven to use my professional experience and my emotional drive to try to improve things. So that what brings me here today.
Well, thank you for being here today. I want to introduce my co-host, Miss Lori LeBay, who may not need much introduction, but Lori, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, basically, I have been a caregiver for my mom for 30 years, who passed away in 2014, living with dementia. I have been a compassionate and passionate advocate of the underdog all of my life, and I'm the founder of Alzheimer's Speaks and co-founder of Dementia Map, trying to get resources to people and make their lives a little bit easier and give them more choice.
Wonderful. Well, Lori, if you'd like to start with the questions, we can start talking about unmasking elder abuse.
Okay, well, we are going to go ahead and kick off this program and hear from all of our wonderful guests today. I know this is going to be a fabulous conversation. And Bill, I'd like to start off with you, and just kind of give us some definitions of what the heck is elder abuse, because not everybody even knows what that means.
Elder abuse, very basically, is, and it differs from state to state. Each state has its own definitions of what elder abuse is. But in general, it is the mistreatment and or exploitation of a person that is 60 or older. And that it also includes, in some states, I know it does in Virginia, persons who are incapacitated from age 18 to 60. Not all states, I don't think, make that inclusion, but it is, in general, it's the mistreatment or exploitation of a person 60 and older.
Okay. Who are the abusers? I think we all probably have our preconceptions of who does this.
It can be a family member. It can be a caregiver. It can be anyone who has the responsibility of taking care of or responding to that senior. It's normally someone the senior knows and trusts. And when that word trust, I always underline the word trust because it means something, it could mean something totally different. It may be a forced trust. Mm-hmm. It could be something that the senior knows that this person needs to take care of them. They need to provide for them. So that trust is not always what we consider the word trust to be. It can be a forced trust.
Well, and I would imagine spammers and scammers out there too. They build that trust and they suck people into different programs and stuff. What types of abuse are there? Because I don't think we talk about all the different types of abuse that actually exist.
Well, let me explain something. You just mentioned scammers. Mm-hmm. And actually, you're talking about two different things. When it is a scammer or someone that the victim does not know, it changes the dynamics of what police and prosecutors have to deal with. When the abuse happens by a caregiver or someone that they know, then you have a known person responsible for that abuse. A scammer could be someone in another country, and it's the same target, but a different set of dynamics that a prosecutor or police have to deal with because they don't know who these scammers are. And a lot of these scams are coming from other countries. The types of abuse, of course, there's physical abuse. And physical abuse is just what it says it is. It can be pushing, shoving, physical assault, forced confinement, anything that is physically abusive to that individual. Sexual abuse is any unwanted sexual contact with a senior or with a person 60 and older. It includes all forms of unwanted, unsolicited sexual acts. Emotional and psychological abuse, on the other hand, is something that is really hard to prove. But it is in a number of states now included in their legislative process. They do define emotional and psychological abuse. I think there are only about 13 states now that actually have that in their code sections. It's threatening behavior. It's ignoring the victim, humiliating, insulting comments, frightening comments, and it's as I said, it's hard to prove, but it can do as much lasting damage as any other form of abuse. The next is neglect. And elder neglect is withholding food, abandoning a person. And we're going to talk about abandonment in a minute, but it's the failure to provide things that are necessary for that victim to have a quality of life, a good quality of life. Abandonment, and we don't hear a lot about abandonment, is leaving a person. I've had instances of abandonment where caregivers would take a person to a public park, shopping mall. I even had a person abandoned in an emergency room in an ER, waiting room, and they just leave them. And, they say, sit here, I'll be right back. And then they just leave. They go, they abandon the person. I remember a uniform officer calling one night. It was very cold. It was snowing. And he was patrolling his area, and he found an elderly lady sitting on a bench. And she said, my son told me just to sit here and wait. Well, when he was found, they had just left her there, and they took off, went to North Carolina. Had this officer not been patrolling his area, who knows? Physical or financial abuse, and I want to spend just a little bit more time with that, because that's what we all hear about a lot, is financial abuse. It's forcing a senior to sell property, stealing the victim's money, checkbooks, or their possessions themselves, fraud, forgery, or extortion of the victim, the wrongful use of a power of attorney for their own benefit. And then there are some things that we can watch for, like a sudden change in banking accounts, inclusion of additional names all of a sudden on a bank signature card. That should start raising some flags. Abrupt change in a will or other financial documents. Obtaining money through something called undue influence. That's coercion, intimidation, even the threat to harm a loved pet. Anything that will force that senior to do something that is against their best interests, knowingly force them to do something that's against their best interests. And I heard someone just a little while ago mention nursing homes or care facilities. That's something that we really need to pay attention to, and we don't pay a lot of attention to it. Seniors who are in nursing homes or assisted living facilities, a lot of them suffer the same type of abuse that they get from that caregivers are accused of in their homes. And we really need to start now, and I want to back up a minute and say that there are some really good care facilities out there. There's some great nursing homes, there are some great assisted living facilities, but not all of them follow that.
Okay.
A lot of them are as guilty as anyone else of committing abuse.
Okay. Are there any other types of abuse that we want to highlight?
Yeah, just one, and that's domestic violence in later life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was with Richmond Place, I was part of a domestic violence unit, and I started seeing a lot of domestic violence type incidents with seniors. So I kind of moved over and started to take a real good look at domestic violence in later life. And it comes in three ways. One are long-lasting relationships where the victim has been a domestic violence victim for 30, 40 years. And they've just accepted that that's the way things should be. New relationships, they will form a new relationship and unknowingly form that relationship with an abusive person. And the last is reverse domestic violence. She may have been I say she, but the victim may have been an abuse victim. And then all of a sudden the abuser becomes incapacitated and and the roles switch.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that introduction. I want to open it up and see if any of our other panelists have anything that they'd like to add.
I was just going to add theft of opioid pain medications. We see it in the community and long-term care homes. And under some of the categories that you just mentioned, we see also physical restraints and chemical restraints. There's also retaliation. We'll talk about it later. That is another form of abuse. But I just wanted to add these to the mix here.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Lori, I'd just like to jump in and ask our panel, because a lot of our panel is in government positions, legal positions. And what happens in the case where you have a domestic violence person come into the hospital, they have bruises or scratches, and they're trying to cover for their spouse or whoever the abuser may be, but the abuser is incapacitated. They have advanced dementia and their spouse is one taking care of them, so they have these violent outbursts. How does the legal, the state, the medical community, how is that viewed and how is that handled in that situation?
Well, let me weigh in with my experience. We would treat that suspect like we do any other suspect who portrays themselves as having a mental deficiency. You know, the test is, are they to the point where somebody could determine that they're legally insane? Are they able to understand the consequence of their actions? Do they know good from bad? So typically where we've had a suspect who is showing or has been diagnosed with some form of dementia, we would certainly have that person evaluated and screened. And then we would make a determination whether or not that disability actually negated the ability to prove intent. In many of these crimes, specific intent is required as an established element of the crime. So we would treat them in any other way that we would treat a suspect who is showing some kind of mental illness.
And so, and thank you for that, Paul. So if a person, maybe they go under observation in a geriatric psych unit for 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever the standard is, and then they deem that person's no longer a threat, it was, a one-time incident, would that person then be allowed to be returned home to their caregiver, their spouse, to continue living?
Well, sometimes that has happened. This is where I'm a great believer in a roundtable multidisciplinary approach, because a prosecutor can't make that determination on their own from reading a police report. Right. So this is why you need to gather on the phone or in person adult protective services, the ER nurse, a mental health counselor, people who can provide the input, the first responding police officer. We need everybody's input to make the best decision that is for the benefit and the protection of the victim ultimately.
I see, Bettina, you had your hand up from Adult Protective Services standpoint. How is that handled?
Yeah, I fully support everything that Paul said. These are the situations that are really critical for collaborative working partnerships and people working together, that everybody has to be on the same page. We've had multiple situations with people who have rather significant behavioural and psychological symptoms of dementia, that have then had behaviours that have resulted in them harming a spouse who have been to Jerry psych. Often they can't return home because there may have been a restraining order issued as per the process. It may be that we have to look for alternative safe care environments while we all work together to determine the future safety. Are there elements that can help reduce the potential of another violent episode occurring? Have we potentially preceded what can be provided in the community? And are we looking at it a more secure environment with professionals that may have to provide that care? But it really is very crucial that everybody is working together. And from an adult protection services point, I also just want to highlight that, especially in the absence of a long-term history of physical violence as potentially a perpetrator of violence, and then the onset of perhaps some violent behaviours as a result of dementia, we would refrain from potentially labeling that person as a perpetrator, because we really want to distinguish between the person and the disease. And in the absence of there being a history, we really see this as actually an element of the disease, because this person existed for many, many years, perhaps without any violent tendencies whatsoever. And this is an incredibly emotionally charged, difficult time for families who may have had a very loving relationship with this individual for 50, 60, 70 years, and then have suddenly seen this completely different change. And so it's really important that we all work together and that the families are really supported to help manage the disease symptoms and the protection also of the general community. And that's, law enforcement and the district attorneys have a really vital role in how we all work together in that area.
Susan, you had your hand up?
Yes. And so when a patient comes into the ER, usually with law enforcement, when it's been called as a domestic or an episode, we look at many things, not just dementia. We look at, is there an illness? UTIs cause a lot of disorientation in people. We also look at, is there over or under of medications that the patient is on? And we look at previous visits to our hospital or to the hospital system, like primary care or geriatric care, so that we can assist. There's a psyche also, and we also in the hospital work together to give information to the Commonwealth attorney or district attorney so that they can help them in making decisions. Do there need to be charges? Does law enforcement need to investigate further? But there's a lot more to it than just hospitalizing and separating them from the family.
Okay, thank you. I want to go to Rick Montcastle now. Rick, we just heard, Bill share with us the different forms and descriptions of what elder abuse is viewed at, but there's also something called systemic elder neglect. What is that exactly?
So, and that may be something that I've kind of come up with. Unlike the elder abuse and neglect in the traditional sense, where you're talking about an individual, maybe a family member, an acquaintance, a caregiver, who makes a conscious decision to act or refuse to act for the purpose of intentionally causing harm to an elder, normally outside of an institutional setting. I view something called systemic abuse and neglect as harm to nursing home residents that's actually tolerated to a great extent and accepted by the nursing home system. And when I say the nursing home system, I'm talking about owners and operators, healthcare providers, legislators, regulators, policymakers, and law enforcement. So maybe a couple of examples to clarify this. These are things that happen every day. As we speak, they're happening and have been happening for decades. So for example, an elderly resident of a nursing home pushes her call button to get assistance to use the restroom. Many people in nursing homes need that kind of assistance. But as she's told by the nursing assistant, who's responsible for taking care of a total of 20 residents on that shift, that because the assistant is dealing with a serious emergency with another resident, she does not have the time to take this resident to the bathroom and that she should go ahead and just do her business in her diaper, and the CNA would come back later to change her. Okay, that's probably not something that's going to get investigated by any kind of law enforcement entity. I would say definitely not going to get investigated, but to me, that's a form of elder abuse and neglect. Another example, an elderly resident pushes his or her call button for any number of reasons, like needing help to get to the bathroom, needing help to get out of the wheelchair and into their bed, needing help to retrieve a television remote that's been dropped on the floor, a myriad of other kinds of things. But the call bell goes unanswered for hours because there are insufficient direct care staff on duty. Another instance that's not going to get investigated by anybody as in the traditional sense as elder abuse and neglect, but to me, that is just as much elder abuse and neglect as the other topics that we're talking about outside of the nursing home or institutional setting. And so those things to me are rampant. They've been going on for decades in our nursing home institutions. They are everywhere all the time, and I believe happen in almost all institutions, no matter how highly they're rated. And so that needs to change. It's a systemic problem. It's not a law enforcement problem. It's nothing that can be solved by any individual person or agency, but it's a systemic problem that needs to be looked at and changed.
And Rick, I think a lot of people that might be watching or listening to this who have had a loved one in a facility, sadly, I think more so than not, they will have those similar, experiences that you're describing about the call light and, laying there to, become incontinent. But how do we fix it? Where is there one source that you go to that then trickles down to the other sources? How do you get these situations fixed?
I think it's well documented. This situation has been studied for 30 years plus. So no more studies are needed. Although every time politicians begin discussing that issue, they talk about, well, let's have a study. Right. No more studies are needed. One of the main causes of systemic neglect and abuse is the nursing home industry's business model that prioritizes the maximizing of profit by minimizing staffing. This has been the model for more than 3 decades. And contrary to the nursing homes industry's lobbies claim that this is the result of nursing home staff leaving the workforce because of the pandemic, the industry has employed understaffing as part of its business model to maximize profit for decades, way before the pandemic. So, for example, there's, if you go into the archives of the studies and the writings about this subject, there's a July 13, just a couple of examples. There's a July 13, 2018 article in Kaiser Health News that describes a review of the payroll data for nursing homes reported to Health and Human Services that shows that most nursing homes are understaffed at various times during any given year. Most. The vast majority, even the good ones, okay? You can even go back to 2006. I reviewed recently an article in the old magazine, the Ladies' Home Journal from 2006. And in that journal, there's a quote from a policy director at an organization that says, the problem is that facilities don't get enough money from their owners to promote quality care. And the article then goes along to say a corollary of insufficient funding is inadequate staffing. And then the article references a recent federal study, so recent as of 2006, that found that to reach optimal staffing levels, nursing homes would have to hire at least 77,000 additional registered nurses, at least 22,000 more licensed practical nurses, and at least 81,000 more nurses' aides. This is back in 2006, and we're still talking about it. We're still studying the problem. There are two things that would go a long way, would not be a complete solution, but would go a long way in a relatively short amount of time to begin the process of alleviating this problem of systemic elder abuse and neglect in nursing homes caused by the fact that the money is not being spent on care. First, two things. First, federal minimum staffing standards would establish a clear standard. Right now, the federal standard is that the nursing home has to have sufficient staff on duty as needed to take care of the needs of the residents. A very indefinite, amorphous, and difficult to enforce standard. Now, granted that some states, I think maybe 18 or so states, have minimum staffing ratios, but all of those are too low and are largely unenforced, and are probably unenforceable because of the lack of a federal standard, because the federal standard is the overarching governance of how nursing homes are run. So a minimum federal standard is needed. But the second thing that's needed is a federal and state commitment to enforce those standards. And that would include penalties that are designed to promote and encourage compliance.
Yeah. Well, and I think too with, it's kind of ambiguous, in my opinion, when they say nursing homes must provide the staff to adequately take care of the needs of their patients. What does that mean exactly? How define needs of the patients, and two, we're already dealing with, CNAs and home health aides that already feel like they're the low person on the totem pole, and they're the ones that are really doing the work, making sure that person is cleaned, has their personal care addressed, and they're being overworked. I mean, we talk to countless CNAs every week, and they're leaving the long-term care facility industry and moving over to the one-on-one care industry because they are all, for the most part, good-hearted people who got into this work because they truly want to care and help people. And they will tell you, we don't have the ability to do that when we're in a facility. They give us 20 patients, 25, 15, whatever the number is, and we're literally just going room to room as quick as possible, or else we're going to lose our job, or we're going to get written up. So like a form of almost like threat, right? Where if you don't do these things, you're not going to have a job. So they're not even given the ability to provide that care in many instances.
Yeah, aside from the fact that they're traditionally have been underpaid.
Right.
There's a concept that I've learned called moral injury. And, so a healthcare worker, a CNA, for example, who is in the business, obviously not for the pay, but because they have a heart to help older people in a institutional setting, when they're required to do more or take care of more people than they possibly can, they now have to make decisions that compromise their own morals. They have to tell that resident who's needing to go to the bathroom, I've got this other emergency here. I'm the only one here to take care of 20 residents. I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. I got this other person's a life and death situation. You're just going to have to go in your bed and I'll come back and clean you up. They suffer moral injury from that. But they have no other choice. They've been backed into a corner. And for that reason, how do you expect someone, even though they might have a heart to do that job and a passion to do it, they cannot come to work every day and have to make those choices where they are compromising their morals, right, and knowingly not taking care of people that they really want to take care of because the nursing home owners refuse to provide them with enough help.
Absolutely.
So yes, they're going to leave.
Yeah.
And the nursing home industry is crying about how there aren't enough people out there to work. That's self-inflicted. They've done that over the course of 30 years, and they need to fix it. It's on them because they're making enough money by running these facilities.
Absolutely. And I would just add real briefly, then we'll go to this next question, Rick. I'm of the opinion that if you are going to, because most nursing homes are privately owned, anybody can buy one. I feel like you should have some type of requirements in order to operate these facilities where you actually know what it is other than just a business investment too. I think that makes a lot of difference.
It does. And that would be some additional steps. Like right now I'm looking at, to me, there's suffering going on even as we speak. And so how do we quickly try to alleviate that suffering? well, let's get the staff up, let's get the oversight up, but there are other things that then have to follow in terms of ownership qualifications, transparency, and how the money that they're receiving is being spent, because after all, 80 to 90% of the revenue of a nursing home comes from Medicare and Medicaid,
right,
our tax dollars. So don't we as taxpayers have a right to know how they're spending their money? And right now, they don't have there's not a sufficient requirement for reporting to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services how the money's being spent.
Absolutely. Rick, as a federal prosecutor, do you have an opinion on the recent Supreme Court ruling that came down about a week ago?
Yes, if you're referring to the right to pursue a lawsuit,
yeah.
Well, it's a good ruling, but in terms of what its practical impact, to me it's very slight. So you're allowed to file and maintain a lawsuit, but how many nursing home residents, how many family members actually have the capacity to do that? And any lawsuit is a civil lawsuit, especially, is 2 years minimum in the system. So yeah, it's a good opinion, but and it sort of helps with families being able to try to enforce their rights. But try is the operative word, because they're going up against entities with huge amounts of resources, and the amount of resources and the time needed to bring one of those suits is very enormous. So yeah, good opinion, but more needs to be done. Much more needs to be done to make things better.
Elon, you had a question?
Just quick to mention that many of you know that the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine released a 600-page report. It's basically a reform proposal of nursing homes in America. And then the Biden administration, 2 months prior, last year, I think it was February last year, also released a reform proposal for nursing homes. And I think that some of the issues you discussed now are addressed there. A concern is a massive pushback by the well-funded industry.
Right. Absolutely. Kind of like big pharma, right? Rick knows a little bit about that.
Yeah, the nursing home lobby cannot be underestimated, and huge amounts of money that they are spending to keep things the same.
Right. Rick,
I'm just going to add the assisted living sector. It's always the elephant in the room. There's reform proposals for nursing homes, but what about assisted living residences? Where a lot of neglect of healthcare is taking, and other forms of mistreatment are taking place. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I know.
I'll speak to that. That's a whole nother story that would probably take,
yes.
It's a whole nother crusade, actually, because the thing about assisted living facilities, and some states are moving away from long-term care to assisted living are less regulated, have less oversight even than nursing homes. So that's going to be another huge problem, as Elon has mentioned.
Well, and I will say, if any of you ever do a podcast on the issue of assisted living, invite me as a guest, because we come into contact with countless families who go into these tours and they sign their loved one up. And not to say anything disparagingly about the assisted living facilities, but the people they are allowing to take up residency in there have absolutely no business being a resident in assisted living. And these families are getting, I call it hoodwinked, because they think, oh, my loved one, this is so much nicer than a nursing home. But it's not a nursing home. It's two different things entirely, but they don't know that. And then literally 7 to 14 days later, they will get letters saying your loved one needs to be moved out because they don't fit our criteria, or here's the options available to you. And those options all just mean more money for the assisted living, or they have to hire companies like ours to go in and take care of that person. But like Rick said, that's a whole nother topic we can get into later on. Rick, when you did your introduction, you spoke about the film that you and our good friend Susie Singer-Carter have made, No Country for Old People. Share with our viewers and listeners what the documentary is all about.
Yeah, so the fact that nothing has changed in 30 years in the nursing home industry is why I'm involved in No Country for Old People. This film, Susie Singer Carter's battle against the nursing home system during the last 6 months of her mother's life. And her mother was a resident of a 5-star facility. And it includes commentary from dozens of recognized nursing home experts. It shows how healthcare decisions in that setting are based on financial considerations. And it shows the systemic abuse and neglect that results from that. Basically, that what happens is that that system robs the residents of quality of life at the end of their lives. And it shows the devastating effect it has on family and caregivers. The film will educate the public about a system that puts profit over people, how that system tolerates a standard of care that strips, basically in my view, strips nursing home residents of their basic human dignity. Hey, go to the bathroom in your diaper and I'll come back and change you. I mean, think about how that would affect you and your dignity, really, and that happens all the time in a nursing home. And then subjects them to torturous living conditions, isolation, neglect, lack of basic necessities, lack of cleanliness, lack of basic sanitary conditions, and ultimately hastens death. And all of this at taxpayer expense, as I mentioned. 80 to 90% of nursing home revenue comes from Medicare and Medicaid. So the film is designed to energize the public and be a call to action, if you will, to demand that our legislators, policymakers, and regulators change the system to prioritize care instead of profit. And so if this is the appropriate time, I'd like to show the 3-minute trailer to the film.
Perfect. We can start it right now.
It's very clear our love is here to stay, not for a year, but ever and a day. The radio and the telephone and the movies that we know may just be passing fancies, and in time may go. Ooh, my dear.
And you have to wait for Rosa. She's coming. Go, Edie.
Hi, Mom. It's me, Susie. What happened? What's the matter?
You're hurting her. She's on the tube.
Oh, it's bleeding.
I know.
So sorry.
I feel impotent to help my mom. She's in pain because they're not taking care of her.
Fighting for his dignity was a horrible battle from hell.
And I'm calling the nurse's station. There's no one picking up the damn phone.
My mother's death was a brutal death at the nursing home.
The nursing home can save as much as $1 million a year by keeping their staffing low.
The lack of staffing.
There's a big problem with understaffing.
Staffing is the root of all evil.
We live in a very ageist society. No one wants to see images of older adults. It doesn't sell.
I love you.
If you're specifically doing it to make sure that the patient just dies in 10 minutes, that's murder.
If being honest and having integrity gets you in trouble, keep doing it.
When cash is the primary reason for doing something anywhere in the healthcare system, people suffer.
There is the huge ethical issue within this industry is you are literally killing people to make more money.
They're trying to make her die faster than she wants to.
Do we care about the patients, the residents, or do we care about the finances of the healthcare industrial complex. And we have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves as a country, what are we going to do for our older adults, for our most vulnerable, for our loved ones? And I think that's why you're doing this documentary.
Thank you for sharing that trailer with us, Rick. When did you become involved with this project?
I became involved in it basically last fall is sort of when that happened. You know, Susie and I was trying to talk Susie through her battle with the system last year, and her mother passed away in July of last year. And afterwards, we were talking about how, wow, you know, her mother's not the only one that has gone through that. She and her mother, how that's continuing to happen, how it's been happening for decades. And we talked about how do we get this changed? How do we energize the public? And during the course of her trying to find a lawyer to represent her, she was having difficulty because an elderly dementia patient in a nursing home does not have your traditional value in terms of damages in the legal system. You know, there's no lost wages, there's no extra medical costs. So I told her the value is in pain and suffering. Document, since I said, you're a filmmaker, document what's going on, do a film. So she had put together, she had gathered many hours of film that she'd made, both for purposes of the family, and then later when we were talking to document for purposes of seeking legal counsel. And so we had this discussion. We decided let's see if we can change things by convincing the public, by showing what's going on to everybody and getting people energized through a documentary. Wonderful. And is there a release date or a completion date? Well, we were hoping to complete it this fall. It's, you know, we're in, as I may have mentioned, it's being edited, which is the most important and time-consuming and expensive part of the filmmaking process. It is, documentaries don't make money, so it's not an investment. So we've been raising money as we've been going along through charitable contributions. We partnered with the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care as our fiscal sponsor. So all of the contributions are fully tax deductible. So it's going to depend on how our fundraising, which is contemporaneous to the making of the film, is going. But our hope is that it will be done and ready for release this fall. Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all the tremendous work you're doing, Rick, and for all of your advocacy. The industry is very fortunate to have you. Lori?
Wonderful. Rick, I love that you brought up about the stripping of dignity and purpose of life. You know, that is something that's not talked about, that whole care culture piece. So thank you for that. And I can't wait to see the film. I want to pull Bettina in next. And I want to get some statistics. I know you have lots of statistics that you can share with us. And, you know, this is something you are so passionate about. So why don't you go ahead and share some statistics around elder abuse? I think people are going to be kind of shocked.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie. And I hope people are shocked. They should be shocked because elder abuse, what I want to say at the very beginning, elder abuse is not something that happens to someone else somewhere else. Elder abuse occurs everywhere. It occurs in the United States. It occurs in all countries around the world. There is nobody who is immune to potentially being the victim of elder abuse. You are not clear from experiencing it due to your socioeconomic status, your race, your religion, your culture. It happens everywhere. And to highlight some of those areas, yeah, I do have some statistics to help put that into some context for people. So globally, it's estimated that 1 in 6 individuals over the age of 60 in the past year will have experienced a form of elder abuse. 1 in 6. That's a lot. If you go to the supermarket or go to your local church, have a quick calculation of how many people are around you. 1 in 6 of those have experienced a form of abuse. And if you reside in a skilled nursing home, that rate's much higher, much higher. Contrary to people's probably belief that they may be safer, they are not actually safer from elder abuse being in a residential care setting. And in the United States, the statistics look at approximately 1 in 10 people over at the age of 60 have experienced elder abuse, which equates to approximately 5 million people, which is a pretty staggering number. Recent data that came out showed that for every case of elder abuse that comes to the attention of certain authorities, there are approximately 44 other cases that are not reported. Prior to this, it was actually 1 in 24. So for every one that we as authoritarian government, law enforcement, adult protection services, whoever it might be, were aware, it was believed that 24 were unreported. So the fact that we're now at a statistic of 1 in 44 is interesting in the sense that it's showing that there is significantly more people experiencing elder abuse than what we realised. But what it also does is it shows that we are not set up appropriately as a system to be adequately addressing it, because we're finding more and more. And if we don't get on top of addressing this, we are going to have an enormous cascade that is not just affecting the person who's the victim, but elder abuse affects everybody, families, your community, our societies. And I'll go into some of the additional effects it can have at a later point. So statistically, we do have fortunately quite a bit of research that helps put it into context, both globally and in the United States. In Colorado specifically, last fiscal year, we investigated nearly 9,000 cases of elder abuse after receiving 24,000 referrals. And that's just one state. So this is a chronic issue. It's a social policy issue. It's a really big human rights issue to be focused on.
That is shocking. It kind of reminds me of dementia, where no one's talking about it, and we've got to pull this conversation, to the forefront. And with Rick's film and conversations like this, I mean, people have to know it's an issue, know that they have a right to address these things, and that there is possibility of change, but we cannot change something when we don't know all the issues. But like you said, we also have to be able to staff this stuff too, as it's coming in, to be able to handle this, which is another layer there. But that is staggering. One comes forward, 44 are still in the closets, that we don't know about. We have to start looking at some of the signs. Are there signs we should be looking for, and to be able to encourage friends and family that might be going through this?
Most definitely. And William touched on some of those signs earlier. Through the variations of caretaker neglect, we're looking at people not getting their medications, not having their personal hygiene needs attended, not being taken to medical appointments. Financial exploitation can result in not having their utilities paid, resulting in them being turned off, their mortgage going into not being paid and going into foreclosure. We see signs of physical abuse, very clear injuries. So whether it's bruises, fractures, scratches, we do particularly highlight the concern of seeing marks that could indicate restraints occurring within homes as well. So there's definitely the signs there for people to be able to see. And if I may, some of the risk factors, just to highlight that, while anybody can be subjected to elder abuse, we do know statistically that there are certain elements that increase your risk. We know statistically that females are likely to be more victimized than males. Now, there's many variations as why that could be. Generally, females tend to also live longer than males. If you have limited mobility, if you are dependent on others for care needs, if you have multiple comorbidities, can all increase your risk of elder abuse. But the most significant one that I really want to highlight that is very clearly documented is that those who are experiencing cognitive deficits, whether it's an actual diagnosis of dementia or not, have the highest risk of all factors to experience elder abuse. And in you just mentioning, Laurie, how we compare elder abuse to dementia, we have enormous statistics on dementia, and we know that dementia is one of the single largest risk factors to experiencing elder abuse as well. Currently, we have anywhere between 6.3 and 7 million people in the United States who have dementia. We have majority of family members who are caring for people with dementia who are unpaid, which causes enormous stress and burnout. We also, I would estimate that as we see our trajectory of people with dementia increasing, we are very, very likely going to see much, much more elder abuse coming to light if we drew a relationship between the two of those. People with dementia who exhibit psychological symptoms of dementia are known by research to have a much higher risk of being abused, whether that's in the home. It's clearly indicated that if you reside in a nursing home and you exhibit challenging behaviours of dementia, you are much more likely to experience abuse by the nursing home staff themselves. And that's all in relation specifically to care. Financially, AARP recently just released their estimated data that elder abuse annually in the United States is estimated to cost our economy over 28. Now, I want to make sure I've got this right, because I always want to say, when I say billion, I think, goodness me, that sounds extraordinary, but it is. $28 billion. There are other resources that have actually estimated this cost to be upwards towards $35 billion.
Wow, that's just astonishing.
It is.
Just astonishing. And when we, look at our legislators and stuff trying to cut costs and see where things are at, putting time and money and energy and staff into this would help on so many different levels. I want to ask you about some of the residual impacts. I mean, that is definitely one of those impacts there that we don't really even know is happening. But when someone is abused, I can't imagine even what that does to their soul and to their family and loved ones around them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we have a multitude. It's a multi-layered effect that elder abuse can actually have. Individually, we see enormous levels of shame and embarrassment, which none of this is it's not the actual individual's fault. This is something that has been imposed on them. They have been abused by someone else. But we do see levels of shame and embarrassment and perhaps not being willing to actually speak out. We also see high levels of depression. We see high levels of them becoming further withdrawn or isolated. Sometimes that can be related to the shame. Other times it can be related to the fact that their funds have been so significantly depleted, they have no financial resources to be interacting in the community or in activities that they would normally do. What we also know is that it has a significant impact on overall health. There is likely to be a much greater decline in health. There is likely to be the development of more comorbidities. And here's something that really might be quite shocking. The experience of elder abuse is likely to also increase your likelihood of death, mortality. It has a relationship to increased mortality, which is very concerning that those experiences can shorten someone's life.
Well, and I think too, added on to that is this, occurs more, it becomes normal, in society. I mean, you just look at, the situation we're having with mass shootings, and everyone's kind of getting desensitized in some ways to this. I mean, we can't let this happen to people. We've got to stand up and address, these issues and get things under control. I liked too when you were talking about, this doesn't just impact the individual and their family and friends, but the community at large, the services, that are provided. And a lot of people probably don't even know what those services are. Like where do you go? What do you do? We hear the term, adult protection, but what does that really mean? How are they, a lot of times we're looking at, well, how are you protecting? Because this happened, but that's where you go when something does happen. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm currently employed within Adult Protection Services, and definitely as a community education support element for anybody that's experiencing elder abuse, or for anyone that suspects that it's occurring to someone they know. We highly encourage you to be contacting your local Adult Protection Services office to make a report. You do not have to have all the evidence. You do not have to have investigated it yourself. That's what their job is. We also highly encourage people to call their local law enforcement office and actually report to them. There are many people that are legally required to, through mandatory reporting statutes, to be reporting to law enforcement. Talk to your primary care physician, talk to a trusted family member, talk to a neighbour, talk to a church, talk to anybody you trust who you think could be a strong advocate to linking you to the right professionals that can help look into this and investigate and assess to help mitigate risk and improve your safety. What we do here often is that alleged perpetrators will say to our clients, if you tell anyone, I will send you to a nursing home, no one's going to believe you. Many, what we would say are empty threats, but are taken very seriously by the person who's quite isolated. It's really important that the community understands that for Adult Protection Services, and I would go as far as speaking on behalf of law enforcement, is that none of us want to move anyone to a nursing home. What we know is that people age much healthier and longer if they remain safe in their homes, in the community. So we want to support people to local community support, such as in-home care services, where they can remain safe. We don't want anyone unnecessarily moving to any nursing homes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Because I think sometimes people, they're just not sure who to talk to or who's a mandated reporter. I think sometimes people think, anybody in a community, let's say if their loved ones in a community, that they're a mandated reporter, but not everybody who is staffed is a mandated reporter. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
That is correct. You are correct. Mandated reporting does differ state by state, and each state that has mandatory reporting will have a very specific list of who is a mandatory reporter. But ultimately, elder abuse is everybody's business and it's everybody's responsibility. So whether you're a mandated reporter or not, everyone is highly urged and encouraged to always be looking out for vulnerable people who may be experiencing any form of abuse and mistreatment and report it.
Okay. So if somebody reports abuse, what is the process from there?
Yeah. And again, it will fluctuate between state by state, but we generally have a general flow. And so speaking on behalf of Colorado Adult Protection Services, we will receive referrals. We will review all the available information. It's very important and required that we are only involved in cases that meet statutory requirements. We can't just go out to just anybody. As a government entity, we never want to be overstepping our reach. So we will review the information, ensure it meets criteria, and then begin what we call both an investigation and an assessment. So we will investigate the allegations that have been made, but we will also do a holistic assessment to identify any other potential unmet needs that we may be able to support the person that may not even be directly related to the allegation. But while we're there, we can be used as a resource to help fill in some of those gaps. Throughout the investigation, we will interview clients, alleged perpetrators, collateral, support networks, medical professionals. We very strongly work with law enforcement and our district attorney's office. We will proceed with outcomes as to whether the abuse actually occurred. And ultimately, we're looking at case planning to maintain the safety and the well-being of that person in their home. I would say the secondary part to our ultimate involvement is that to really support our law enforcement partners and district attorneys to really look for prosecutions, because we feel very strongly that without the community and society seeing the strong consequences that should be coming from this, we are not leaving a clear enough mark as to what potential punishments can occur. Unfortunately, as a society, we have somehow veered into the direction that as people age, they somehow become less vulnerable. And as has been mentioned before, dignity seems to somewhat be considered also less valuable. And we want to really bring that back into light, and that is actually not acceptable. That is not okay. We are all human beings, and we all deserve the right to live free from any form of abuse and harm in society.
Thank you so much. You're just a wealth of information, as is all of our panels. Lance, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
Thank you, Lori. I just want to follow up with Bettina really quickly. Bettina, for families who might be listening or watching this and they're hearing your explanation of APS and the procedures and, you know, the reporting and mandatory reporting, and if they suspect that a loved one, or maybe it's a neighbor even, or someone from their church, of being a victim of some form of elder abuse, should they call the police or should they call Adult Protective Services? And what's the distinction between which one you call first?
Sure. So not to complicate the answer, I apologize. A lot of that can depend on who's calling, what state you live in, and mandatory reporting laws. My recommendation is that you call both. Call both. Here's the good side, though, at least for Colorado. Legislatively, law enforcement and APS are required to share all reports within 24 hours. So irrespective of who you share it with, you will be confident that both agencies will receive the same report and that you will be able to get a response. But because I can't speak on behalf of the entire country, I would urge you to call both. I realize that may seem like a little bit of an extra time commitment, but that way you can be assured that you're getting all the information that's really crucial to the right people. Because we all want to be protecting people, to be reducing this. And it is such an important topic that really needs to be brought to light everywhere, you know, whether we're in the United States or any other of the countries where this is occurring everywhere.
Right. Right. And I think, too, they can also make an anonymous call as well, correct? If they wanted to not put their name out there?
Absolutely. In the state of Colorado, all reporting parties are actually protected. Their identities are protected. So you could be assured that your details are not shared with family members. That is the most common question we get when we arrive at people's homes is who called. Very reasonable question. I would also want to know. But we also want to provide a path that people feel confident in reporting, because sometimes people are like, I just don't know. Like, I feel it. I see something. I know something's not quite right. But they're also concerned about unnecessarily or inappropriately accusing someone or causing a ripple within the family. And like, you know what? That's okay. Make the report to us. We will go in and we can actually determine if something is actually occurring that would be within the remit of elder abuse.
Thank you, Bettina. Paul, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to follow up and agree with Bettina and say that for the public, when they do call both APS and the police, one tip that I've always passed on about calling the police, if they determine it's not a life-threatening emergency, then call the non-emergency police number. And before you do that, do your little research to find out what the code section is for elder abuse in your state. When a member of the public actually quotes the penal code section, it gives them street credibility with the police department immediately, because they go, wow, these people know what they're talking about. So I always, in California, I say, quote penal code section 368 when you're talking to any law enforcement officer. That will get an immediate reaction.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion, actually. I can see them saying that, okay, we're dealing with people that know what they're talking about, which always helps, right?
Definitely.
Yes. Thank you, Bettina. Elon Caspi, you recently had a study on the fear of retaliation and increased risk for those with dementia. You surveyed 30 nursing home, or I'm sorry, you surveyed over 100 nursing homes in 30 states to examine the survey of their complaint investigation reports. What did that show you, and what did you learn from those?
Thank you. First, the report was created by the Long-Term Care Community Coalition in New York City. They funded this study. And I want to talk a little bit about this, I believe, common but largely invisible source of harm and form of abuse of older adults in long-term care homes, nursing home, assisted living, obviously also in the community. So I set several goals for this study, but one of them was to learn about the consequences of a nursing home residents' fear of retaliation, alleged threats of retaliation, perceived retaliation, and actual/confirmed retaliation by staff members or managers. And there's a long list of emotional consequences, but also physical consequences. I'm just going to name a few. From anxiety and fear, depression. Some residents were terrified to be wrongfully evicted from the care home. And just imagine having a physical or a cognitive disability, and you're being receiving a threat to be put on the street, and you have no idea where you're going to live the next few hours. The fear of retaliation led many residents to avoid requesting assistance with provision of personal care. It led to reduced reporting, obviously, or delayed reporting. It's as important, the delayed reporting. There were numerous instances where the perpetrator remained in the building, or even on the floor, or even interacting with the individual despite warning signs and red flags that were brought up to management. So that means also lack of mitigation, lack of holding perpetrators accountable. There was the elder mistreatment, meaning the retaliation and the threats of retaliation. Basically, when they were not reported, investigated, it basically perpetuated the poor care and mistreatment for these individuals. And as I mentioned, there was also physical consequences. One resident I remember, she had her medications and they fell in bed and couldn't find them. And a nurse came in and went ballistic and pushed her in the bed to look for the medication in such a forceful way. Later, the older woman said, "He almost broke me in half." There was also instances of what we call reflexive, or what CMS calls reflexive retaliation. Often happens during provision of personal care. That could be undignified person, that could be with severe stages of dementia, may push away or even hit the staff member. And there's this reflex punching in the face. In one case, a resident was in bed, and the resident was also has late stages of dementia, rejected provision of personal care physically, and a staff member pried the resident's hand open, pulled the pinky, bent it all the way towards until the resident screamed. And the witness who saw it, another staff member, said something along the lines of, "I've never seen such evil." And as we mentioned earlier, and I started as a nurse aide in this field, that the majority of people who provide care in nursing home are dedicated, are caring, are loving, but they're working in a broken system. So that's one aspect of the project. And I'll leave it here at this point if you had a follow-up question or.
Well, yeah. I had previously talked to several of the guests in other, settings and interviews. And one of the things that, we often talk about is the fear of the retaliation, because if you're, an 80, 70 plus year old, grandmother who no longer can drive, and you have your grandson or granddaughter or son living with you in the home, and, they have their own issues, but they're unfortunately your primary caregiver, and they're neglecting you, and they're verbally abusive, and hopefully never physical, but often physical as well. If you turn that person in, or you let somebody know about that, all of a sudden your only support that you have left is now removed. So you're left figuring out, what do I do now? And so is that the biggest reason, other than maybe retaliatory in a physical way or a financial way, that they're also concerned about the retaliation in a form of they will lose the only support that they do have?
Well, absolutely. This is people who have way more experience than me in the community, but I can talk about in a nursing home and assisted living. In my study, residents prefer to stay in their adult dependents soiled in urine and feces throughout the night, just to avoid a particular staff member who they all experienced abuse and retaliation, and they were terrified. So they're practically being mistreated, neglected, just to wait to the morning shift. Yeah, we talked about dignity, right? Yeah. So I don't know if you wanted to ask. So what can we do about it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say. So what can be done to help alleviate these fears of retaliation and hopefully prevent actual retaliation when they do voice their concerns?
Right. So there's first of all, context, high level. There's a gross asymmetry of power in nursing homes and systems. Others here can talk about it in the home setting, family sometimes, or people who provide home paid individuals. But I want to take a quote from Mairead Painter, who's the Connecticut State Ombudsman, kind of bring us a little bit into the ground level. I really love this quote. It says, whenever you talk about any type of abuse, there's a dynamic. The person, that is the perpetrator, is using that to isolate. They start to carve the person out. They keep them alone. They keep them in fear. And so when you align with someone, you may be able to break some of that dynamic down. That is what we would really encourage people. And that's where the role of the ombudsman comes in too. And with that, but it's, this is very important, how to balance the asymmetry of power. And I think a lot of it starts also with top leadership, the owners, the presence of nursing home administrator, the presence of the director of nursing, the presence of the manager on the floor, talking with how are you doing, and to make sure there's zero tolerance for these issues. I believe that it has to do with awareness. We need public campaigns in the community and in long-term care homes. We need educational initiatives such as about what are the rights, what constitutes fear of retaliation and actual retaliation. What are the methods or the strategies to address it? Let me give you an example. In Connecticut, in 2012, they passed a law. To my knowledge, the only law in the country. I'd love to hear about other states doing that, and if they do, I'd love to learn about it. That there's a requirement. Every nursing home in Connecticut, they must provide annual in-service training specifically on retaliation, with multiple components in their training manual. And other things that, just creative things. Connecticut is very creative on this front. Now residents, and many people don't know that a lot of residents actually have iPhones, and they have a QR code. And if I'm bedridden, I can still swipe a QR because they're handing out flyers. There's posters, and they provide this information. The ombudsman, you can swipe your iPhone and you immediately can talk with them, and they know you're right. Talking about how can we change the asymmetry of power there. Another thing they passed, I believe partly or largely due to the pandemic, is they passed a law that allows residents to use technology of their choosing. That's a quote. Of course, there's conditions about privacy for a roommate, etc. That you need to respect the dignity and confidentiality, if the roommate, etc. However, the Mairead Painter is telling me that now they're getting mistreatment and threats of retaliation and retaliation footage directly to the ombudsman. This can immediately go to the survey agency and to police. So how do we find creative ways to balance that power? I would say document. If it's not document, it doesn't exist. I would also say, how can we get the person to have a close advocate, such as experienced and qualified ombudsman, who can support you emotionally and reassure you about your right, inform you about your rights, and help you through this journey, this often tricky journey of the fear of retaliation, and let you know about your rights and what are your options. And when the ombudsman is in a care plan meeting, when the ombudsman is even during a state survey, the entire dynamic could change. But let's talk about their rights first. So I wanted to start closing here by saying that retaliation is real and retaliation is abuse. Residents in nursing homes in America have a right to be free from fear of retaliation, not only from retaliation, to be free from fear of retaliation when voicing care concerns and when they make allegations of mistreatment. And last, as mentioned here loudly earlier, as the Commissioner of Health of Minnesota said, former Commissioner of Health, I should said, the laws are only as good as their enforcement. And I will leave it here. This is obviously much more complex. And the report is called They Make You Pay for Retaliation Silences Residents in America's Nursing Homes.
Thank you, Elon. Just one quick question. How does these issues differ or are accentuated when a person has dementia and they're concerned about retaliatory?
Well, first of all, we need, I know it's not the answer we want here, initially here, but we need more studies, and so in the study, we had residents who were fearful of retaliation when they saw their roommates with a mid and late stage of dementia being abused and retaliated against, but they themselves were fearful. But some residents reached a breaking point. They say, I'm willing to experience whatever comes at me because I can't see this anymore. I can't see this abuse anymore, and I can't see this retaliation. And they had to speak up because they were only one who saw it except the perpetrator. So I believe that there are ways, and there's a whole question here that I shared with Lori about, why is it that older people with dementia are at high risk of mistreatment? And what can be done about it? So I'm not sure if that's where you're going with this, but we know that if the voice of even cognitively able residents is not heard, let alone what about the voice of people in mid to late stages of dementia, and how we create safeguards as well.
Right. Well, we appreciate your participation, Elon, and for bringing this issue to light through your studies and your articles, which will all be up on the screen and in our show notes as well. So thank you very much. Bettina, you had a question?
I just wanted to make an additional comment to Elon in that I think all too often it's very easy to pass over people with dementia who do report concerns, and it's very easy to dismiss them as just being simply confused. And that it's so important and critical that we do listen. Yes, they may be confused, and yes, they also may have been witness to a very significant crime. Let's say it's a crime, and that we do need to be paying attention to what is witnessed. We had a horrendous case with a husband and wife who had dementia who shared a room, and the wife was being brutally and violently raped by an employee that the husband was witness to, that went on for an extended period of time, that when we became involved, she not only had current fractures, but old fractures, and how nobody within that facility was willing to actually acknowledge what was happening, because it had been going on for a long time before we got involved. And when we did get involved, the blame was placed on the husband. rather than being concerned about the fact that the victim had very, very clearly identified her perpetrator. We need to listen to what people with dementia have to say. They are seeing a lot. They're seeing a lot more than all of us. Right. They're actually the ones living behind closed doors.
Absolutely. Lori?
Gosh, this, I could talk about this all day long because there are so many stories and things, but we need to keep moving along. Susan, I want to pull you in because you're a forensic, you do forensic services on these cases. And, what exactly does that mean? And how do we get someone to dig in deeper to our case?
So forensic services is providing medical care, of course, first, and providing collection of documentation versus interview. We have to listen to what the victim has told us because usually that tells us where we need to look for evidence. We do the physical exam, and then we also do documentation of the injuries by drawing. We do it by photography. And you need to be trained to do that because you're looking for old injuries and you're looking possibly new injuries. Like everyone has talked about, there's been probably repetitive abuse. And so you don't always see the old injuries, except for when we do radiology studies and you can see old fractures and old broken bones. But biggest thing is that they're referred to us usually by law enforcement or APS. They come into the emergency room. Some cases do not make it to the ER or do not see a forensic nurse. They are just seen by law enforcement. And so just an interview is done, or some photography is done, but not to the extent that needs to be there for prosecution. So we use a lot of basic tools. One is just a ruler. I mean, you need to use basic things so that you can literally compare hands that have strangled someone or restrained someone. You can tell also we use ultralight for photography, and I can tell where there are bruises, but that they're old bruises. So that's important also. But basic, it is going head to toe and looking at the person and documenting injuries and working with your team. You work with law enforcement, you work with APS. We are just part of a team to collect evidence. One big thing is ERs that don't have forensic nurses. A lot of it gets pushed aside. You're talking about a physician coming in to see a patient and a nurse for 5 to 10 minutes, and they're asking for the complaints. Even if they do call in with law enforcement, they do a basic exam. They're not going to do a head-to-toe exam of the patient. So I always encourage law enforcement when I do trainings or even with this, that you seek out a forensic nurse to exam. And I worked with Bill Lightfoot for a long time, and we did many elder abuse cases. Probably the worst I think that we did was a young man was pretty much putting his mother out there for sex. He was making money off of people sexually assaulting his mother. Horrific incident. And that PERT kit was hard for me to do. And she cried all the way through it. It was very difficult. But we did prove what was going on. Bill and I did, charges were taken against the son, and she was removed from the home. But documentation. So if you're in a facility and someone does talk to you about being abused or neglected, or even you need to document. If you're a nurse and you suspect anything. First, you need to report to the immediate supervisor. If you're a mandated reporter by the Elder Justice Act by Congress, you need to report that. Their APS, what we've been told as nurses and CNAs, or to law enforcement. Usually facilities will not report law enforcement. That's usually the last place that they report. They report to APS first. They should call both, just like Benita said. Both should be involved in this. Of course, it's going to go through the chain, and there's going to be time lost for evidence in a facility because they're trying to figure out how to go through the system. Not probably the best way in the system. I'm not saying that they're trying to hide anything, although I know that there have been cases that have come into our ear that things have been hidden for months before we see the patient. With pelvic fractures, with twisting of arms, we see a lot of spiral fractures in elderly from where people are just twisting their arms and causing them pain and difficulty. So if you're CNA or you're a nurse, you need to document in that chart. That chart is a legal document, and it should be documented. And yes, those charts will be turned over to law enforcement eventually.
Okay.
But there needs to be some basic documentation.
Okay. Well, great. I think, can a family hire a forensic person when they go in for examination, or does it have to come through the police or APS?
So they'd have to go to, there are forensic programs in every state of this country. They are in more trauma centers or big local hospitals. Your urban hospitals, most do not have forensic nurses. You cannot hire them. They're mostly in hospitals. There are some that are mobile, and Alaska has the best program of all, believe it or not. They have a mobile forensic team that will go to the local hospitals. They even fly them to hospitals for exams.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, this conversation is so interesting. Lance, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over to you.
Thank you, Lori. Christine Sundberg, you're a Executive Director of Elder Care IQ and Elder Voices, EVA, and an advocacy nonprofit organization. You had a personal story with your father that really transitioned you into this advocacy role, but one thing that viewers and listeners may not know about you is that you were successful in getting legislation passed that requires licensing of assisted living facilities, which includes many improvements in their care standards and significant protections. Are you seeing an improvement in the care and a reduction in the abuse, neglect, and exploitation from when you first started your advocacy role?
That's a tough question to answer because that law became effective on August 1st, 2021. That's right in the middle of the pandemic. So we've got all that going on. The investigation work came to a screeching halt by the Department of Health because they were redeploying their staff to work on that. So you have that. And Elon mentioned the health commissioner's comment about laws are only as good as they're enforced. We underfund our agencies. We've got really good laws. They're good. But when you don't give them adequate funding to do the oversight and the enforcement, you have a gap. I would say, but having said all that, yes, it has, because we now have laws that assure accountability. And the other thing that's really been accomplished with that piece of legislation is that the Department of Health now has really become quite cooperative. They're working with us as advocates, whereas before, I think things were more aligned with the providers. Now I feel like the playing field's been leveled a little bit. And our two guideposts are transparency and accountability. We need to have transparency in the practices of the long-term care industry. They operate on a business model, not on a care model, and that's a huge distinction. Then the other piece of this is we have to have accountability. Without accountability, there is no change. One of the things that we've done to further both of those is we've developed Elder Care IQ, which provides all the licensed nursing homes, assisted living, home care, etc. And it will provide to the consumer at the click of a button whether a particular place has been investigated for abuse, neglect, or exploitation. And we launched that in November of 2022. I was expecting a pretty modest reaction, but I think we had over 4,000 visits in the first few days. So it just tells you that there's an untapped need to get that information. So yes, is that law working? It is working. Is it is working as well as we'd like to see it? No, but we do know what we need to do to fix it.
Right. Well, and I just want to jump in. We're based out of Michigan, and our family does own a home care company. And one of the very disappointing things for us as a reputable company is Michigan's a non-licensed state. So, and we're not the only state. There's no regulation, there's no oversight over the home care industry, but yet if we go to our neighbors in Illinois, they are licensed and regulated. And I had a conversation with the president of the Home Care Association of America about that very issue. And it goes back to, like Rick and I were talking about with these nursing homes. They're owned by business people. It's a profit first mindset. It's not a care first mindset. And getting everybody to get on board with saying, yeah, let's make Michigan licensed or whatever state it is to become licensed, it's causing more, red tape, more bureaucracy. It's going to cost them more out of their pocket, and they're not going to get those, not going to get it passed in their state. And, we tell families all the time, make sure when you're hiring a home care company in Michigan specifically, you know what you're getting. Because they may say they're a company, but do they have the protections in place? Are they doing the proper background screenings, drug testing, motor vehicle screening? And that goes right to the root of a lot of these issues. It's the Wild West. Anybody can say they're a home care company, and you're sending anybody you want into these people's private homes, and you don't know who they are or what they are. And it's very scary. And a lot of families, again, they don't realize it and they don't know that.
Well, you know what I would tell other states who are trying to deal with these kind of issues. There were two really important factors that made us successful. And one was that our members, family members, were willing to talk publicly. They were willing to go and testify. But probably the most important thing is the work we did with the media. Mm-hmm. And the media is the only reason that the political will was created in Minnesota to actually address this. And but I know that can be challenging, finding a reporter who will do that kind of homework and do that kind of reporting. But I'll tell you, it's critically important to achieving real, foundational reform.
Right, absolutely. Chris, let's talk about how residents and families can prevent or reduce the risk factors of abuse in the first place. Like, where do you start at?
Well, one of the things in listening to the conversation from everybody here today, all really good advice. One more piece I would really highly recommend is using cameras. Yeah. Camera evidence can make or break an investigation, and it's imperative to try to maximize that kind of technology use. We were being contacted routinely by families saying, oh my gosh, I've only got 2 days and I've got to find a place for mom. But how do I pick one? How do I find it? First of all, they're under a time crunch and they're starting from, ground zero. What we would do is, in our opinion, one of the best resources available to really get a handle on whether they do provide quality care is to look at the Department of Health investigation data and information. But it was enormously cumbersome to use their website. I'm pretty technically capable, and I found it frustrating. That's why Elder Care IQ was developed. We knew the information sitting there. It's extremely valuable. And there'll be other informational resources on the federal level, as well as report cards, et cetera, that will make that tool even more robust. But not every state has an easy to use tool, but most of the Department of Health do have some sort of reporting of these kinds of cases of abuse and neglect.
That's great advice. And just to go back on the cameras, we recommend to every family we encounter, it's very inexpensive, it's low cost. You can get no monthly fees. Go buy a set of Nest cameras or any kind of web cameras, set them up around the home. And it's not necessarily to watch staff per se, but it's for the safety of your loved one too. Because if they're left alone for any periods of time and you don't get a hold of them when you're trying to call to make sure mom, took her evening meds before bed, now you're frantic, your heart's starting to race a little bit. Well, is she okay or is she sleeping? But what would you advise them if they're in a nursing home though? Because nursing home and hospitals, they're not going to allow you knowingly to have cameras, set up in the room for HIPAA and all other sorts of regulations.
Actually, no, our laws have now been changed to allow that. If you fear that there's abuse or neglect happening, you have a 2-week period to put the camera in without the knowledge of the facility management. Now, if you have a roommate, of course, you've got to get the permission of the roommate there as well. But the industry hates it, just hates it. They fought that, tooth and nail. But importantly, we were successful in getting that. So if other states have prohibited use of cameras, shame on them.
Yeah. I see Rick nodding his head and kind of grinning. Do you have something you want to add there, Rick?
No, I just agree that the industry hates it. That was they hated it, and they actually will, even in states where it's legal, the staff will tell you can't do that. So. People need to know, they need to check up on the laws that apply in their state and push back on that if in fact they're being told something that is incorrect.
And that kind of goes back to Paul's suggestion, knowing the penal code when calling the police, know that code when you're going to go set up cameras in your loved one's hospital room or assisted living room as well.
And we've learned from our people, they're routinely lied to.
All the time. Very sadly, yes. Chris, I just want to wrap up here real quickly and see if you could share with people where they can go to get help to address poor care and just, outright abuse of their loved ones.
Well, I think some really good suggestions have been made already. One would be the ombudsman. I think most states have an ombudsman, and they can be very helpful. The one thing to keep in mind is very few of them have any enforcement authority, so it's always a pretty please kind of arrangement there. And going to report it, in our case, Mark, the Minnesota Adult Abuse Reporting Centers that first go to, and law enforcement. If it's a criminal sort of investigation, talk to your physicians. They can also be very helpful. There's lots of areas for, and we have various other nonprofits that do different kinds of work too. We're happy to help people. Others are happy to help legal services, etc.
Well, and I just want to say thank you to you, Chris, for your advocacy and the tremendous work that you're doing. But I just want to mention something before I turn it back over to Lori. I think anybody who might be watching this and has thought, you know what, I'm alone, I'm fighting Goliath here, there's not support, there's nobody else out there that understands this. I think by all of you adding your remarkable voices, experience, and expertise to this panel, I think you're giving a lot of people hope too. So thank all of you for that. Lori?
It's really interesting, this conversation. We talk about retaliation to the person, to the family. As an individual, I was retaliated against for reposting one of the articles that was written in Minnesota about abuse from a community. Didn't put a public notice, but sent me a private message on how dare I. And these are just family thoughts, and there's nothing behind them. And it was just really, really interesting on how I was attacked for taking sides because I reposted something, and had to say, hey, look at my work. 90% of what I do is positive, connecting, but the good, the bad, and the ugly we have to talk about, at all. So I just wanted to bring that up when you had mentioned about finding a reporter willing to even do this, because retaliation comes in all kinds of forms. Paul, I want to pull you in. You have just had such a wealth of experience in terms of, prosecuting and heading up, the elder abuse prosecution unit in San Diego for 22 years. I don't know how you've kept so quiet through this whole thing. I've been seeing a lot of the head nodding and things that's going on, but my guess is there's a lot of barriers that you have to overcome in terms of pulling together a case. Can you share, some of that with us?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. And actually, part of what I've learned as a prosecutor is you need to listen more. And then you ask the questions afterwards. And before I go into those barriers, I just want to pick up a point that Lance made. I mean, I was shocked to hear that Michigan doesn't have licensing regulations for home care agencies. So when you said that, I Googled, do you need to be licensed as a plumber in Michigan? Oh, yes, you do, under licensing and regulatory affairs. So isn't it just bizarre that before any plumber can come in to do some major work in my home in Michigan, they have to be licensed? But if I need to bring a caregiver in to take care of a loved one with dementia, oh, whatever. I mean, this needs to change. So anyway, and one other point about Chris made about cameras, we've had successful prosecutions thanks to the fact that residents and their families have, unknown to facilities, put in cameras into the room. And 1,000 words is not as good as one video frame, So, and just to get legal for a minute, there is no expectation of privacy by an employee walking into a resident's room. So they can't use the Fourth Amendment as an argument as to why that video is illegal. So I just want to give you very briefly 5 limitations on why cases don't get investigated and prosecuted, which I battle against all the time. Number one, and this is from actual examples that I've battled with over the years. Number one, law enforcement will often have told me, oh, forget it, Greenwood. She's 93. She's not going to make a very effective witness. And besides, she's got dementia. No, nothing could be further from the truth. We've been fortunate to bring in people with early, moderate, even advanced stages of some form of dementia. I mean, Bettina's point was well taken. People with dementia have a voice and they can tell you things. And the worst thing we can do is to ignore them or just sweep them under the table and say, oh, they're confused, they're demented. Secondly, when there's an allegation, particularly of exploitation, I've had first responding police officers say, oh, that's just a civil matter. And I've had to very diplomatically, but very forcefully tell law enforcement, you are the worst people to ever say that something is civil or not criminal, because you're not qualified to do that. You're excellent at putting handcuffs on people. You know how to handle a gun. You know how to do a hot stop on a vehicle in a busy street. I don't know how to do that. I would never be able to do that because I'm not qualified. But I am qualified, I think, after 40 years as a lawyer and as prosecuted in hundreds of cases of elder theft. I think I am qualified to say what's the difference between a civil matter and a criminal matter. Don't you do it. You gather the facts and give them to a qualified prosecutor to let that person determine if it's a crime or not. Thirdly, there is so much confusion and misunderstanding about consent. I've had police officers say, and I know William referred to scams. They've said, oh, well, hold on, Greenwood, this is a scam. Yeah, but the victim wasn't forced into sending the money. There was not a gun. There was not a threat. There was no duress. I said, hold on, it's still a crime. And unfortunately, this whole argument is being bought into by the financial institutions who want to protect themselves from civil liability. If you know about Zelle came out with this article last year, which I think is ridiculous. They try to make a distinction between a fraud, where you can get your money back, and a scam, where you can't get your money back because you voluntarily gave the money away. Sorry, that doesn't work in my book. You look at the misrepresentations, you look at the lies, you look at the deception. That's what builds the crime. Fourthly, and this frustrated me no end, where a detective would write at the end of a report, case closed, victim declines to prosecute. This is a misconception which is widespread through the media and through every state. Victims never get to choose which cases get prosecuted. But unfortunately, there's too much of an easy way out for some law enforcement to provide that to a victim. So where the suspect, particularly is a family member or is known to the victim, a police officer will often say, do you want to prosecute? And the victim will look at the officer and go, and they look at the gun and they look at the uniform. And they, he's such a nice boy when he's not drunk. No, it's okay. I think we can handle it. And then the officer disappears. That is wrong. They're not allowed to do that in domestic violence cases. They're mandated to do an arrest where there's reasonable cause. So why don't they do that with elder cases? And my fifth one is, particularly when there's an allegation of a fraud or a scam involving somebody who's not known to the victim, police will often say, this crime didn't occur here. It's somebody else's responsibility. It happened overseas, so we don't have jurisdiction. Wrong. If the phone call comes in, if the email comes in, if the letter comes into the victim's home, the crime occurred in the victim's residence. So that local law enforcement and that local prosecutor has every right to investigate and to prosecute. So these are ongoing misconceptions. And I've put into the chat box, I know you're going to reference it later, Laurie, about EAGLE. EAGLE is a wonderful resource for law enforcement. It stands for Elder Abuse Guide for Law Enforcement. And if they follow this training, actually, then hopefully we can overcome a lot of these misconceptions. And what we would love to do within the next 5 years is have every law enforcement agency in every state in the United States trained in EAGLE. And if we do that, I think we can really put a dent into a lot of these cases. Because remember, and I think I wish the legislature would figure this out and absorb it. By the year 2035, which is only 12 years away, there'll be more people in this country over the age of 65 than children under the age of 18. Now, what does that tell me? It tells me that we should fund adult protective services to the same level that we fund child protective services. Do you think that's happening? Oh, no. There are probably in every state 10 times more child protective service workers than adult protective services workers. So just like I'm confused why Michigan doesn't license caregiving agencies, I'm confused why legislatures don't fund adult protective services properly.
That's an excellent point. And your 5 points of why, some of those barriers. I mean, what slapped me in the face was really just the ageism, and they're not important. They're old, they're demented, whatever term they want to use, that it's just not worth their time, basically. Do you think some of that is due to short staff, or do you think it's just a culture?
I think short staffing is an excuse that is thrown out there, but I don't accept it, because I tell you what, every prosecutor in this country will never ignore DUI prosecutions. And you know why? Because Mothers Against Drunk Driving will be on their backs immediately if they do. And they can't use lack of resources to tell people, well, we're not going to prosecute misdemeanor DUIs. I remember my first DUI trial. I had a Mothers Against Drunk Driving advocate in the courtroom. And I asked her, why, I'm pleased to see you, but why are you here? You know what she said? To make sure you're doing your job. And I think that's the same with elder cases. And so I think it's more a case of lack of training, lack of priority, and unfortunately, in some cases, deliberate ageism, where older adults with dementia are not considered to be as valuable victims as others.
Well, one thing when we were talking here throughout this whole conversation, one thing that just kept bubbling up to me is I'm not aware of, and maybe they're out there, but our support groups for families going through this. I mean, I think a lot of the support groups that have, are on Facebook and things like that, all of that chatter, that's raised awareness. I mean, they've been pushing their doctors for better answers. They're giving them more resources. They're doing more interviews. They're speaking out at different things. Could that be a help, or could something like that hurt a prosecution if people are talking about their particular cases, publicly?
Yeah, that's a good point to raise. Obviously, we always get concerned as prosecutors that witnesses don't talk to one another to possibly contaminate or have the inference, well, you've grouped together and you're ganging up on the defendant. But no, I think it starts, for example, with victim advocates within a district attorney's office or with the police department. But it also extends to organizations that I'm now affiliated with, AARP, who are doing a phenomenal job with Fraud Watch Network groups. So inviting people, families who have a victim within their family, to contact them. And what they will get is a listening and an empathetic ear, and getting AARP, for example, to connect the families with the appropriate resources. Unfortunately, some families don't even know who Adult Protective Services are. And so AARP can say, well, look, call your local APS and they will help you as well. So I think connectivity is essential, but then allow the prosecutors to make sure that there's not too much interchanging of information between witnesses.
Yeah, I guess where I was coming from in terms of support is, there's a lot of real raw conversations that happen in support groups on Facebook, and I'll use dementia as a specific. And sometimes they're asking, is this abuse? What do I do? But it's that family, I think, that not only needs the services to go to, but a social support, that they're not alone. And I think, to me, that's one of the biggest things that has helped dementia move forward, is this banding together. And that's why I was wondering if there are, social support groups for that. Is anyone aware of anything like that out there?
Chris has her hand up.
Oh, Chris, thank you.
Yeah, Lori, I think you've touched on something that's very important. And Elder Voice came about in the beginning as a group to help each other, and we kept that going. So we're always open for families and elders themselves. We're a safe zone for them to talk and express theirs. And they're much more comfortable talking to people who've been through it than anybody else. So AARP is a good resource. I'd also suggest looking for other advocacy groups, such as Elder Voice Advocates. They've been there. That's the difference of an advocacy group. They've been there, they've experienced, they know exactly what you're talking about. This isn't an academic exercise to them, and it's enormously healing for the people who've gone through this trauma.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Elan?
I want to just add to what Chris, my close colleague and friend, said, is also that the trauma is oftentimes is long-term. We have people, older adults who are abused, and you come back a year later, 2 years later, they're still terrified that the perpetrator will jump through the window. So there's long-term implications. And then I want to add another piece here is the guilt. And that's I'm hearing through Chris, through Elder Voice, through other organizations, the family members experience a lot of guilt that perhaps they placed this individual in a particular place that they were told or were hoping that the person will remain safe, and then they're completely devastated, and the guilt. And who is looking into that? I've yet to see a single study on guilt among family members after a loved one experienced different forms of abuse. The family members in the days, weeks, months, and years that they're carrying it with them and bottled up without support.
Great, thank you. Lance, did you want to pose one last question to everybody, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up?
Thank you, Lori. Yeah, before Lori closes us out today, I just wanted to first again say thank you to all of you for your time today, for sharing this important topic and issue that we're hopefully going to get closer and closer to finding a resolution to in the future, because it's so needed desperately, as we've all learned. And I also think having this panel and all of your backgrounds and different professions that you're coming to it from also shows how this isn't just one area. This is all centrally, located in our society in all different forms of professions. But we talked a lot about some very sad, dark issues today, obviously, and I want to kind of ask something on a higher, nicer note, if you will. With all of your backgrounds and experiences, if you could just briefly share one thing that you have encountered or that you were a part of that had a positive impact, meaning, you helped somebody in a certain way. What kind of gave you the motivation to be able to do this for all the years that all of you have done it for? What's one thing that positively impacted you in this crusade in your professions? And I'll start with Chris.
Thank you. That's a tough question. I'm constantly getting that kind of affirmation because people are always coming to Elder Voice and saying, thank you. Thank you. What you've done is helping. And even, the things that we start to initiate, we keep going forward. That's what fuels us, knowing that we're making a difference and having a positive impact on people. So we're just beginning. We're going to keep our advocacy, and it's going to grow all the stronger.
Thank you, Chris. Rick?
Yeah, so I think the one thing that comes to my mind is putting a nursing home owner out of business and actually out of the profession because they got excluded from Medicare and Medicaid operating a very bad nursing home in rural Virginia from out of state, from Miami. That would be the Avi Klein case. And that nursing home, those owners got pushed out through our prosecution, and a new owner came in, and by all reports, the new facility was way better. Wonderful. So that was gratifying to, even though that case took 5 years to do.
Tremendous. Bettina?
We don't tend to get a whole lot of the thank yous, but that's okay. That's okay. Because it's the small moments that count. It's the small moments where we do get justice through our wonderful district attorney's office that I work with. It's the small moments where you know that you've left a family and you have helped support them to live independently, healthy, safe in the community, to be able to get on with their lives. And perhaps not quite as big as Rick's. There's one particular case where we've had enormous success in that we're still continuing to work on, where we feel that there's going to be some very solid justice come through the system to show that we will not tolerate elder abuse, and we don't care how much money you have, and we don't care what your business structure is. We will fight against you to bring justice to those who maybe can't bring it for themselves.
Tremendous. Bill.
Hard question. I think two things have impacted. When a senior comes back after you've engaged with them or helped them do whatever they needed to do, and they come up to you and say thank you, you help, you get that feeling that you've actually accomplished something, even if it's just one person.
Yeah.
The other is, I started this 15 years ago, and I'm happy to see the level of involvement has grown over 15 years. Not just here in the United States, but in a lot of places. For instance, the UK is doing some great stuff with elder abuse. The movement has grown, and it needs to continue to grow.
Elon?
I'm aware that we are living in many ways in a post-truth society. That being said, I want to add to what Chris said earlier. What led to Elder Voice Advocates' success was the fact that many families were were brave enough to go to the Capitol and tell their story. So that's a critical piece that is not only impactful, but it's also inspiring. And I often put pictures of family members or residents that were harmed differently, and that keeps you laser focused. Yeah. But I say because you can't stay indifferent, you can't remain indifferent when you hear the stories. And I would add to I would say what Chris said is the stories, the families. It's working with media, diligently cultivating relationship with skilled and talented and caring investigative reporters. And the third piece is data. How can you access data and that when it exists and analyze it quickly, sometimes in a very short period of time for the legislative session about to start, and create an impactful report, as opposed to, and I have a lot of respect for academia and research, the wheels of academia are too slow. And so how can you access data on different forms of mistreatment, bring it to the Capitol, to the new lawmakers, and educate them? And I would end by saying one of the most rewarding thing is to inform older adults, is to inform and educate family members about their rights, is to affirm their experiences and to empower them to pursue justice. And there's power in numbers, because many of them may feel very, very small, and many of them may not even want to pursue justice because they're so traumatized and exhausted. But together, this is what happened with Elder Voice, together they have a voice, and that can make a difference when they get together and they share the story, support each other, and then pursue advocacy together.
Thank you. Absolutely. Paul.
Thank you. I think I look back on the privilege I've had of representing and pursuing justice for victims. And it's the cases where a victim was turned down by law enforcement. For example, it's just a civil matter, where we then picked up the case as a prosecutor's office, used our own investigator, put the case together, presented it to a jury, and got a conviction. And it's when the victim comes up to you after the guilty verdict has been rendered and says two things. They say, "Thank you for believing in me." And then secondly, they say, "And thank you for giving me back my voice to tell my story in the courtroom." And that means the world to me. And it still does, even though I'm not as a prosecutor anymore, it still means the world to me if I can do something to help that kind of victim achieve a measure of justice for themselves and to get their voice back.
Absolutely. Susan.
The one thing that I want to say that keeps us going as forensic nurses is the feedback from law enforcement and our Commonwealth attorneys and district attorneys and APS, knowing that the information that we do gather goes forward to help them make the right decision for the elder or the elder that's being abused. So that feedback is so important from the rest of the team in making things better for our elders.
I wanted to ask that question, one, to end on a positive note before Lori closes the show, and show, though, that each of you all have examples of how differences can be made. And it is possible if you use your voice and you seek justice and you stand up for the elders and the elderly in your life. And I want to say thank you to Lori for being a great co-host today, and I'll turn it back over to her.
Well, again, we want to thank everyone who is on the panel and everyone listening. And one of the asks that we have here at Conscious Caregiving with L&L is we would like you to join the cause and be a conscious caregiver by sharing this episode on unmasking elder abuse. Your likes, your clicks, your shares. It's important to get out to your sphere of influence. I mean, I still go back to Bettina's statistic for everyone that comes forward, 44 are sitting in silent suffering. That needs to change. And the only way that's going to change is by us pulling together, sharing this wonderful information of where to go, what the process is like, how to find help. So again, I thank you all for being part of the show today. I think it is very, very valuable. This is still a taboo topic that needs to come out. And, we need to create comfortable, safe spaces for conversations to be had. And hopefully for people to be asking questions of prevention before it hits their own home or their own community. How do we prevent this? So again, I want to thank you all for taking the time to educate people and helping, raise awareness of this taboo topic. We all need to work together. I mean, look at the amazing thing that the people on our panel are doing. And this is a small snippet from, around the world of people who are making change happen. You can be one of those too, just by subscribing, just by sharing this information with others. A lot of people won't talk about this topic until they're really in a crisis, but we need to have this conversation sooner. And the more awareness we can put out there, the more resources we can have for people, the more likely they're going to reach out sooner than later and come together as a whole to really be a force to reckon with. We will also have people's contact information for you as well as resources in the show notes here. So again, thank you so much. And we hope you will enjoy our next show, which will be in July, covering driving in our elders. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to you joining us next time here at Conscious Caregiving with L&L next month.